Everyone, I'm Rachel Kaur-Khan, founder of Productable. Welcome and thank you so much for coming to yet another Invisible Enemies of Innovation Quick Talk. So, for those of you who might not be familiar with us, Productable is the innovation startup behind Project Holodeck, and we're so honored to be working with more than 80 innovations, including all the most recent Spark Tank finalists. So, on that note, huge congratulations to Team Arcwater for your big Spark Tank win. Your innovation is absolutely amazing, and we can't wait to help you scale it across the enterprise. It was so fun to be a Spark Tank judge and be a part of all of this amazing process. So, on a business, anyways, we have a great opportunity here. We started this webinar series as a way to discuss innovation roadblocks that we've seen in our work with the Air Force. So our next speaker has experienced all of these roadblocks firsthand. You might know him as the former assistant of the Vice Chief of Staff. He's a retired lieutenant colonel and a career Air Force intelligence officer with 20 years of experience. He's driven broad transformation across a wide range of strategic analysis, tactical reconnaissance, and human resource management organizations. His accomplishments include leading Air Force Special Operations Command's largest and most lethal intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance squadron. But beyond all of the really fancy, incredible accomplishments that Bingo has, what we really love is his unbridled passion for disruptive change. And that's exactly why we at Productable snagged him as an advisor as soon as we possibly could. So with all of that, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Taylor Herron, otherwise known as Bingo, who's here to talk to you about Invisible Enemy number 7, Must Adhere to Vision.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Rachel. I really appreciate it. Yeah, and it's cool to be a part of this team. Yeah, I got an opportunity to do quite a bit of things in the service, but probably the highlight was definitely working with different airmen across the service to kind of help them, birth innovations, and just super, super cool. So, first, just thanks for what you're doing to help arm our airmen and guardians with the tools necessary to drive innovation. I think it's important in business and in life in general, but it's particularly critical in the highest stake game that we play, which is effectively defense of our nation. So really appreciate the opportunity to jump on here and share my perspectives on some barriers to innovation that I've seen, and maybe a couple of tips on different ways to help overcome them, and then honestly kind of hearing your thoughts too, so it'd be cool. Previous speakers have already hit on some really key ones. The one I wanted to focus on was this concept of stubborn allegiance to your vision. So kind of where I started in this journey is probably like a lot of folks with this idealistic picture of these great innovators or just folks that like overcome obstacles at all costs. They grind it out despite all the odds. It's like a hero in a story. They succeed despite all the challenges. And if you just put your nose to the grindstone long enough, eventually you kind of pop out the other end. And there's certainly those that fall into that camp, right? But I'd offer that more often than not, what really separates the goods from the greats in this business is not that, just pure stubborn determination and lack of flexibility. It's actually quite the opposite. It's that, willingness to pivot and to, capitalize on opportunities as they come up and actually be flexible. Not flexibility on principles. You have to be passionate for sure. You have to wake up and be willing to do the 2 o'clock in the morning, kind of stuff. But flexible in how you achieve those things that are important to you, and how you really get after and accomplish what is your why. So I think you definitely see this on the commercial side. Elon Musk, didn't wake up dreaming of building rockets, right? I mean, he famously tried to buy them from Russia. I'm glad he didn't. That wouldn't have worked out well. But when it didn't work, he was flexible enough to adapt, right? Andrew Mason didn't set out to build Groupon, right? He was trying to build a collective action website, but here we are today, right? So being a successful innovator is all about discovering and exploiting opportunities to drive change in a way that gets you closer to your goals. And that's only possible if you're willing to be flexible in your approach. So while you see that in the commercial world, I think it's even more important in the defense ecosystem for a couple of key reasons. The first one is the defense ecosystem is largely a closed one, right? So like there may literally be one office, only one office that can approve what you're trying to accomplish. So unlike the commercial world where you can't simply like take your idea to a different buyer. You can't be like, hey, here's my thing, you don't like it, whatever, I'll find somebody else. But a lot of times that's your only buyer, it's the only person, right? So like it puts incredible pressure on you to kind of sell your concept to what may be the only person that can say yes. And if you aren't willing to adapt your ideas and make them appealing, you're very unlikely to be successful. Second, the defense ecosystem, it's highly fragmented. So you face the compounding challenge of not needing just that one yes, but often like many consecutive yeses to get over the line. So it's like you got to line up all these things to make sure they kind of work out in the end. So in the DoD, it's like extremely rare to find the guys that are the policy owners, the resource dudes, the operational end users, and all those guys in the same place. A lot of times they don't even know each other, right? So that means for you as an innovator, you have to bring together, not just one, but many stakeholders and find that like ever elusive Venn diagram of overlapping interest that you can capitalize on to make progress. And so in doing that, it requires you to, pivot and pivot and pivot and pivot again and again and again until you finally find that place of mutual alignment where you create it to move forward in like a really meaningful way. So there's a lot of tactical tips. I would say that for me, I largely look at this through the view of what I think is probably the most critical element of any innovation ecosystem, which is really the people. So for me, it's all about stakeholder alignment and kind of working through that process. And so just for fun, I thought I'd bring out a Rubik's cube. I'm not going to solve it because I can't, because I didn't have long enough to memorize how to do it. But when I think about stakeholder alignment, I think of it kind of similar to Rubik's cube. So for me, the first thing I do is I recognize that the glass is always half full. Like there's no partial full, there's not whatever. When you have a 10% probability, you're ecstatic because you're 10% of the way there, right? You're not 9% of the way not there. So like if I'm trying to get this whole side to be white, when I see this, I don't get depressed. I see like, yes, we're on the way. Like we're almost there, right? If we keep going, we'll get there. And I think that's like super important for a couple of reasons. I think, one, for yourself, you've got to be willing to realize that you're going to walk into an environment that if you're pushing the edge of possible, it's not easy, right? You're going to be in a spot, if you're doing anything meaningful, you're in a spot where you have to change a lot of things to make things work. And so, you're never going to walk in and see a side of a Rubik's Cube all ready to go. You're always going to see something like that. And you always have to be able to look at that and like not be down about that, but be excited that you don't have one piece, but now you have two. And like, man, you're making progress. And if you can just get a third and a fourth and a fifth, you're gonna get there. So I think it's important for you to kind of keep yourself motivated. But it's also important because like if it's anything worth doing of consequence, you're not going to do it alone, right? You got to pull in a crowd of people, particularly in our ecosystem, if you will. But the same is true anywhere in life. Very few of those people you're going to be able to direct and say like, you shall do exactly what I say, which means they've got to like want to talk to you. So like if you walk up to them in every conversation, you're like the Debbie Downer that they never want to speak to, you're probably not going to get a lot of phone calls answered. And they're probably not going to want to like pour their soul into whatever you want to get it done. So like, I think that optimism is super important. I'll slight detour there just to say that doesn't mean that it's not normal to feel super frustrated with a process, right? Because most innovators will fall in love with with what they're trying to get over. They'll get frustrated about all the different challenges there. I can tell you, I certainly am on that roller coaster a lot. But I think it takes some discipline to realize that when you're on the wrong side of that roller coaster, it's the wrong time to make a phone call to people and yell at them for why it's not working, right? The right answer is probably take a deep breath and do whatever gets you back in your yen space, and then pick up the phone again and keep doing your thing. So I think recognizing the glass always half full is a really important thing. I think the other piece is you got to be able to build bridges between communities. So like if I want to get this little white box over here, I'm going to have to move this thing around a lot. And I'm going to have to park some white boxes on some other dudes' turfs for a little while. And like, if I'm going to try and take dudes and put them on someone else's turf and like have some people work together, it's probably important that they know each other, and they like each other, and that there's something there. And it's important to kind of understand your key stakeholders and figure out how to kind of pull them together in a way that like isn't forced. And, it's a long-term effort, but I think if you're not building bridges between those communities, you're highly likely to be successful as well. The other thing I'd offer is that it's important to maintain optionality. So I may not care about any of the colors on this box for whatever reason, but I might really need to be in this plane at some point. And so if I look at this today and I say, I don't care about you, you're over, you're done, don't care, they're not going away. They're still there. And when the day comes, I need to flex there and I can't because I've closed doors. That's probably not useful either. So, maintaining that optionality, I think is really important because you never know when you're going to need it. And then finally, I guess I'd offer to, maintain an open mind. So like, as you go through that discovery process and that, deep empathy work, and you try and figure out like, how do I pull all these stakeholders together to somehow get that win-win, and like everyone's got a full side of the cube and like they're all winning out of this, you're probably going to learn a lot, and you're going to realize that maybe what you thought you're going after, maybe there's actually something more compelling that those stakeholders can do together. And so maintain that open mind and realizing that like if it's just you, you're only going to go so far, but if you can kind of pull people together and get them, closing off that cube together with you, I think you'll find that you'll be a lot more successful. So you got to maintain that open mind as well. I'll turn over to you, Rachel, for Q&A. It's a short one. But before I do, I just want to tell everyone out there that's dialed in, one, thanks for dialing in. It's pretty cool. But two, like if you're pushing the edge, take comfort in being discomfortable. Because if you are comfortable, my argument would be you're probably not doing anything of real consequence, right? Like all the meaningful work is hard, and you're pushing at the edge. And so the day you find yourself comfortable, you're probably in the sad place of all the other souls that will probably never make a meaningful difference. So take comfort in being discomfortable or uncomfortable, and keep pressing. So, all right, Rachel, to you.
Well, bingo. I love that analogy. That was really beautiful. I mean, thinking about the work that I guess just personally Productable has done to figure out how to collaborate with the Air Force has been like a 8-sided Rubik's Cube, I guess they have a lot of sides, a 15-sided Rubik's Cube, if you will. So, and just working with you through thinking, hey, we got to make one of those big turns that's going to get everybody all together. You can definitely feel those pivots that we're taking. And it does take so much letting go to make that all happen. So really appreciate your perspective and your thinking on that. I know personally, I'll be trying to take all your advice and thinking through those turns as we're feeling them. To take a few questions from the audience, please feel free to put them in chat. The first one we got is, can you give me a tactical example of when you've seen people leverage well in the ecosystem? So just an example of when you've seen this work, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, first one, so I've been on the fringe of a lot of this, but the first one for me was, it really, really frustrated me as a commander to see airmen pouring like their heart and souls into super manual processes. It just killed me. I'm like, there's got to be a better way. I would log onto my phone at home and it's like, 10 times better. And I'm like, come on, let's just bring some of this technology forward. So I was on this like push for something called chatbots. So I'm like, we need to get chatbots into the ecosystem, like let's quit having people do this manual thing. And like chatbots are going to solve this problem and it'd be great. So I went over to Lauren Knopfsberger, the Air Force CIO. She was like the chief transformation officer at the time. And I'm like, chatbots, it's amazing. And she said, not chatbots. She's like, robotic process automation. I'm like, what's that? I'm like, I had no idea. I pivoted because it was still something that kind of went after what I wanted to get after. And there was some stakeholder alignment there. But then I stumbled into someone that probably did better than me, which was Melinda Monahan. So she's now up at Morpheus there at the headquarters. But so, Melinda at the time was pushing the robotic process automation, kind of effort. And so her vision, and that she was, I think, Innovator of the Year a couple of years back, and she, done some stuff with Spark Tank and all that. But her pitch was like, I'm going to make Air Force Personnel Center the robotic process automation center of excellence. So that's what she went in for, right? If she had like anchored on that as the solution only and was like uncompromising in it, the candid reality is she wouldn't make it very far. She would have been doing some really good work there, which she did. I mean, she did some incredible work in the personnel center side, but the impact of what she could do would largely be confined to that space. But as she reached out, she realized pretty quick, actually the better spot to have a center of excellence was PO business enterprise systems, because they had some ties into stuff and they could sustain it. But to make that real, she had to work with someone called HNC, right, to basically work the programmatic side of it. And then to do that, she had to get some money. So there had to be some like, what are the use cases? And some of those were A1 personnel related where she came from, but some of them were logistics, right? So she pivoted over. So like watching her do that pivot between, the different ways that she would execute, but still kind of stay true to her vision of trying to like expand robotic process automation for the Air Force. It was like watching a master class and kind of how to do that and seeing her kind of stitch together the ecosystem. So tactically, that's probably one of the better ones I've seen.
That's awesome. I love that example. And thinking through her experience and your experience as well, Just curious, how do you know if you're pushing too far or if you're pushing the right amount? Because it's really going to require getting out of that comfort zone for everybody.
Yeah. Um, so I think my equivalent on this was data transformation for the Air Force. So tactical steps seemed really aggressive. Say we're moving like this fast, we want to go here, and that like we're going to triple our effort, and that seems like oh my gosh, impossible. I felt like it was always good to zoom out a little bit and be like, where do I want to be at the end of this? And I want to be, wherever that is. And so if I want to be here and I want to be there in 5 years, what kind of speed do I need to move at to get there in 5 years? And then I realized it pretty quick that like, hey, our little triple our effort thing wasn't going to do it. So it almost made it a little bit less scary. It made me realize like you could actually jump a little further than you thought. But so I think framing out a little bit is helpful. I also think that when it comes to that stakeholder alignment piece, understanding when you're going to close the door and when you're not. So you can push people to the point where like that door is closed and you've locked off that side of the Rubik's cube of sorts, and like you're not able to operate in that space anymore. That's a cautionary tale. Like I wouldn't you have to be very careful to jump too far down that path. But everything up into that point, I think, is fair game. And then beyond that point, I think it's a question of doing things kind of one-on-one personal with those stakeholders in that environment to kind of show them where their path probably isn't going to get them where they want to go, and like trying to figure out how to help them see how to go a little further. But I'm probably the wrong guy to ask about how to throttle, because I don't throttle very well. So
Well, something I've noticed is when you drive direction, you do always you do it with kindness and respect towards the people that you're working towards. And
sure.
I think that's what's really enabled you to be as successful as you are as well, for amongst many of the reasons. To take one of the other questions that I have coming in, what do you do about the people that are just constantly saying no for the sake of no? So how do you work through pushing an idea forward through that?
Yeah. So this is kind of the close analogy for me is frozen middle. So I hear a lot of people refer to the frozen middle world of like, these guys just do not want to get there ever, right? I think my experience has been that those guys rarely exist. They do. There's a couple of them, but in general, what it really is it's about incentives and structure and kind of their world. So like, the short answer here is empathy work, a lot of empathy work. But so my case example as a commander in AppSoc, I certainly pushed a vision that made a lot of people uncomfortable and moved a lot faster than they had to. And through that process, I probably grew up quite a bit, but I certainly created a lot of friction in that process too. But I'm still friends with the same people I created friction with. And from their view, so from an empathy exercise, imagine that you laid out a 10-year roadmap and you spent 3 years to advocate for the funding and everything else to get this 10-year roadmap moving. It's a pretty good roadmap. You're on your 5 of 10 of execution, and now some dude comes in and says, we want to do something different, right? And then in 2 years, a different person's going to come in and like dramatically slay it some other direction. If I were in that seat, I wouldn't want to do any of that. I mean, I'd be a hard no as well, right? I'd be a frozen middle of sorts, for all the right reasons. And so I think what's important is probably finding the win-wins in the scenarios and finding the ways to kind of share the success piece. So I will tell you that tactically, there's been several times where there are offices that don't want to work with me on a given issue that I win and get there, and then the next note is from somebody else thanking that office for the incredible work they did, right? So I think you got to be willing to like lean forward in that sense and kind of share in the success of the thing and make it a mutual success. Because it's super easy to do the opposite and just thump your chest of you won and they lost and all that kind of stuff. And then candidly, if you really get to a spot where it's a hard no and it's just a pure obstacle, well then they're usually not the only people in the ecosystem to work with, right? So you can potentially find other people in that ecosystem and kind of as a collective kind of work through it.
I love all of that advice, Bingo. And one of my favorite comments here is somebody says, I don't have a question, but I just want to say Bingo is a national treasure. Thank you for continuing to work with the Air Force to make it a better organization. And I couldn't agree more with that. We are so lucky to have all of your advice and thinking towards this. I've never heard anyone call it a Rubik's Cube before, but couldn't think of a better explainer of all of the kind of work that you've had to go through to bring all of your successes to life. So with that, is there anything else you'd like to add as we close up?
Um, no, are we over already? That was quick.
It's
No,
just a
I
quick
mean, yeah, again, what I would say is that anyone that's kind of looked, most of the audience here, I think, is defense space. And so from a defense space, like, be bold, like, you're not going to beat China. You're not going to, beat Russia, do all the great things that we really need to do with half measures. And so I will tell you that my largest successes have come on the days where I've got an email and I'm ready to hit fire, and I'm like, I should or shouldn't send this, and I might get fired, I might not, and then I'm like, I just hit it, and I'm like, well, we'll see what happens. I think if your heart's in the right place, I think what I've kind of learned is that you generally end up okay in that scenario. More often than not, I think the biggest limiter people put on themselves is literally themselves. And so, I think the easiest way for me to relate that is as you look back in your own career and you think, if I had the wisdom today, when I was a lieutenant or pick, a couple ranks down, or, sergeant or whatnot, oftentimes you kind of think I probably could have got away with more than I thought, So I think things are often a little bit scarier than they feel. But, there's CEOs running multi-billion-dollar companies that put on their pants the same way everyone else does, right? And they make it work. So I have the courage to step out, because I think you got a, humongous opportunity and candidly responsibility to, really shape defense for the nation. So anyway, so thank you.
Awesome. Well, that's incredible advice, Bingo. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us in the Invisible Enemies of Innovation Quick Talk. And we've put a bunch of links for our upcoming webinars and information coming up soon. So we hope you can make the next one. And thank you again so much, Bingo. Hopefully we'll get to hear from you again soon.